All right, good evening. Good evening, good evening. Welcome. This is second to the last task force meeting, so we are nearing the finish line. It has been a long journey. Much of that journey you were with Tasha, and so I just want to welcome her back. I was delighted. Yay! She sent me a text today, and because I didn't know she was coming, I'm so excited to have you here. You are such an important part of the foundation building that was so necessary to get us where we are today. So welcome back, Tasha. Yeah. All right. Also, a little public service announcement. If you didn't have a chance to look at the artwork out there, that is just so much fun. And just delightful to come in and have the energy of kids. So a lot of fun there, a lot of proud kids. So tonight, here we are. First of all, the agenda review. I don't think we have, do we have anyone here for public comment? No? Okay, great. We're going to hear from Amanda, who's going to give us a communications campaign update. And then most of the evening is actually going to be in small group, and I'll explain sort of how you're going to do that. But given that we are getting near the finish line, the best way to sort of iterate on the work that you've done thus far is to do it in small group. It gets really difficult when you have, 10 to 15 people. So I'll explain how we're going to do that in just a minute. I want to make sure, is this gentleman public comment? No, gosh, I couldn't even see you. I'm like, public comment, come on in. Jake, sorry. Which group were you in? Right here. Yeah, sorry, Jake. Boop. Amanda, I'm going to turn it over to you. And I'm not quite sure how you toggle into your...
It's on there.
It's on there. Okay, great.
And I've got the video. All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Amanda Arns, and I am the communications strategist in the communications department here at the City of Inglewood. And I'm here today to show you or update you on our Home is the Key campaign. So this campaign really will highlight all the work that you've been doing in this group. So just providing a little update here tonight. So the campaign is called Home is the Key, and here is our lovely logo and color palette that you'll see throughout the all the publications that we do for this campaign. I went too fast. Not used to this clicker. And then you'll see it here in the latest Inglewood magazine. I've put some copies on everyone's station here, so please take a look and read the story. I think it turned out really, really great. Some great information in there, a great kind of launch of this campaign. It hit homes this week, so if you've already got one in your mailbox, you can leave it behind and we'll redistribute. But I wanted everyone to have it in their hands so they can look at it and read the story. You'll also see some signs about the Home is Key in our neighborhood parks. These signs are located currently at Jason Park, Romans Park, Cushing Park, and then Bellevue Park as well. So you'll see these signs. They'll go up and down throughout the next while we launch this campaign. And then tonight we are going to debut the video that we made. This is the first of several videos that we'll be launching for this campaign that will be promoted through our social media pages and our website. So I'll start with that, share that with you.
We always try to find sites that are going to be a good fit for our residents. As far as the community overall, we have some really great amenities, a fitness room, secured indoor bike storage, pet wash. We are a very pet-friendly community. We have a community room that has sort of the garage door opening that kind of relays way to the indoor-outdoor spaces that we love here in Colorado so much. So it opens up into a outdoor patio area with grass and trees and grill area. So really too, just to encourage people to connect and encourage community. It's really important for communities to have a balanced housing continuum. You need to have all different types of housing available to people. And it's really important. This rent reduction is in place for 40 years. It is secured through a land use restriction agreement, which is filed on the property. So it is enforceable, permanent, and in place. The only way rents will get adjusted is as defined by HUD, and in the past that's been limited to no more than 10%. Of the 82 units, we have 10 units that are 3 bedrooms. So we are really proud of that as well, because it's hard to find an affordable 3-bedroom unit. A lot of these communities, they're serving folks who are out there working hard, trying to make ends meet. Often, entry-level teacher, police, fire, paramedic services. So really a full spectrum of people in a variety of phases of their life. We just walked over here and I saw a family and I was just like, oh, that's the best thing ever. It's the people living here. So many people that came together to do this and worked really hard and were persistent. The city was great just throughout the process. Even our contractor and architect have reported back how helpful the city was throughout, not even just the planning process, but through the design, approvals, building permitting, and construction, and final occupancy certificates. So there's a lot of cities that that's not the case. So we're very thankful to have such help.
So again, that is the first of several videos that we will be pushing out, starting probably as early as next week on our social media pages, so be sure to follow along there. And I know many of you are participating in the storytelling and video projects, so stay tuned for your debut. Like I mentioned, we've got a lot of social media. This is kind of our branded kit. Obviously, it doesn't have the full information here, but when we start, our next step with the campaign is to start reporting on all the work you've been doing in this group. So when we take all of your information, it will look like this when we put it all out to the community to really just hit homes, let the community know what all work and findings you found in a really eye-catching way. And that's it. So are there any other questions about the campaign and upcoming videos? Awesome, you guys are so easy. Well, thank you so much, and stay tuned because all of this will be hitting your social pages and mailboxes upcoming.
And Mark is telling me that's a lot of hard work and so important, right, to the work that you all are doing. I clean my glasses, Jay, but clearly I now know I need to go in and get them checked again. It's not easy getting old, so apologies that when you walked in, I didn't call you by name. All right, so here's what we're going to do. So you all worked in between sessions. We had 3 questions for you. The questions were, how might you make the recommendations, or first draft of recommendations, 10% better? What is glaringly missing? And then the third question is, what do you still need clarity on? That one's a tricky one because I think if we keep asking that, there's always going to be unanswered questions, and we will do our best to answer those. And so in the final iteration, we want to make certain that we can accelerate that process, whatever those have to know the answer to questions to be able to finalize a set of recommendations. So what you're going to do, at your table, you each have a copy of this so you can read through it. It was also sent out as pre-work, and you can reference that. So what you'll do is you're going to pick someone who is going to essentially rewrite your recommendations on the chart paper. You want to write as legibly and as large. We have plenty of chart paper so that folks can read it. Although we're not going to put it up on a wall, we'll actually keep it at the table so you don't have to go like super large, but just want to make sure using the markers there that you're writing large enough for folks to see. You're going to have 30 minutes for this activity. So you're taking your recommendations, the last iteration, which is here, and you're going to review the input that you got. If there are questions that require staff to answer, we have Brad here, we have Tim here for a portion, and we have Lindsay here who can help answer those questions. Once you do that, then we're going to have another opportunity to give feedback on each group's work. All right, and I'll explain the directions at that point. Any questions? All right, giddy up. I'll give you a time warning in about 20 minutes so you know how much time you have. let's do a check-in for a second. So the next iteration was I was going to put you, you were essentially going to sort of cycle through so you could give input on each group. However, if you're feeling like you'd rather have that time to work on just your group, we could do that. You need a little bit more time. How much more time? So I can make adjustments. 10 minutes?
Instead of cycling through, which I think takes some time just to like get up to speed on the,
Yep.
should we like present and talk like as a group about each?
We could absolutely do that because you do have I have time for report outs. So let's make that adjustment. Great idea. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to simplify. So we're going to give you 10, 15 more minutes to work on your group. Then what we'll do is you'll report out to the large group, and then we'll just have you use certain color stickies. Or we'll have a discussion first. And then if there's any sort of final input that you want to give, we'll use sticky notes to do that. Does that sound like a good plan? Okay. More paper. You got it. So I think everyone is at a place where you can share out. So before you do that, I have 3 stations or 3 spots on the walls here. Build is here, assist and preserve next, and then fund in the back. If you could put your chart paper, and then if you can choose someone who's going to report out on your next iteration of your recommendations. When you get to the feedback place, we're going to have we'll have some discussion first. But when you get to the feedback, what I'm going to ask you to do is be as concrete as possible at this stage. And that you use the corresponding sticky notes, so orange for build, blue for assist and preserve, and green for fund. But again, we'll have a conversation. Which group would like to kick us off? Thank you, Corey. Corey, let's get you a microphone.
Hello? Okay. All right. On that sheet, we had 3 different recommendations. What we actually did was we combined 2. So we combined 1 and 3 into one of them. And then we kind of nixed one of them and created a new one. The first one is, in furtherance of the Affordable Housing Task Force strategic vision, the city needs to create a predictable, consistent, and dedicated affordable housing fund. This investment in funding will better position Inglewood to secure partnerships and leverage other funding sources to create and preserve affordable housing. The city should analyze multiple proposed funding sources, summarized below, to determine their potential revenue amount and path to implementation. Proposed funding sources include, but are not limited to, linkage fee on new development, inclusionary zoning fee in lieu, dedicated property tax, dedicated sales tax, discretionary general or city funds, progressive real estate transfer tax, rental licensing fees, and then in parentheses below that, we put prioritize funding sources that spread impact over multiple stakeholders and leverages those profiting from the sale and ownership of property in Inglewood. So just kind of to guide, we can make assumptions about what is our favorite, but without some analysis on their magnitude and how feasible it is, we don't really know. But as people do that, saying, hey, this is what we think you should prioritize in looking at that. And then our second recommendation is create a body to provide recommendations for implementation and consistent oversight of funding provided. At the beginning of its formation and subsequently every 3 years, the body should provide recommended priorities for how funding should be allocated based on Inglewood's housing needs. So basically, we're going to create funding. We want a body to recommend how that funding should be used, recommend priorities for how that funding should be used, and provide some oversight on when that's used, checking in to see if it was used correctly and how well it worked and all that kind of stuff to inform future use.
No, I think that summarizes perfectly what we discussed. We did think that the body fell well under fund because we didn't want to recommend number 1, which is raise a lot of money, without number 2, some existing way to implement that or oversight for it.
Questions? If you could use the mic. Sherry, please, thank you. We're still recording.
Is number 2 a volunteer body? Or
I think that's why we just went with body, because I don't know if I know government well enough to know what kind of body that should be.
Yeah, we have our number 2 kind of ties in a little bit with maybe that body or person or champion or that is in a full-time position to ensure that the money is being spent in accordance to what the strategic vision is.
I would envision, and maybe this is some added detail, that it is not a full-time position within the city. It's some other kind of body that is, because I think, you know, if this money is filtering through the city, we want some kind of balancing accountability.
I mean, let's say it's a group like ours that continues, but maybe there's a full-time person that is within the city that is working on all the projects and is the connector to help bring these to life and online.
Yeah, they're reporting on some of the oversight
Yeah.
pieces, you know, how that does, but that body is.
It's like the executive director.
Yeah, exactly.
I was gonna say the same thing. We could set it up like the Inglewood Housing Authority is set up, where you have a board that oversees the executive director position and approves or whatever.
And you want to be that body. You just said that you want. I heard that.
Like that way the DDA is set up even, with development downtown.
Oh, yeah. What did I say?
That the Inglewood or.
Housing
what do you guys-
Authority?
Innovative housing.
Yeah, I don't want to do it. I mean that in a very nice way.
It's being recorded, all right?
Other questions? All right, can we give it up for the fund?
Do I get to pick the next person?
Yes, please,
All
thank
right.
you. You just choose them. You go, Corey. Thank you.
Okay, we had a lot. So with the system preserve, the first one we addressed the missing item. And we said to look at regional and county approach to open opportunities for new funding and grants. So if we took a regional approach rather than just a city approach, we might be able to access Arapahoe County funding, different grant options, and just look at it from that perspective instead of just what can Inglewood do. We also talked about inclusionary zoning ordinance or housing ordinance fee in lieu supported, so using a percentage of those new fees that we're talking about implementing, or a percent of any permit fees that gets dedicated to the source. I don't remember what the question was, though. How do we fund this position? There you go. And then assist number 1, how do we make this better? So somebody mentioned taking out the short-term rentals that were already disallowed and eliminating, but we think we should keep it in there. Actually, this is where I'm at. Leave it in there because we want to make that intention clear, but also focus on bolstering enforcement of non-owner occupied short-term rentals. So we really kind of crack down on that, but it's still in the goal of assisting families to become homeowners and focusing on non-owner occupied short-term rentals or deterring that. And then number 1, how do we make it better? I'm trying to find, oh, this is on the second page. It talks about several points are geared towards down payment assistance, maybe streamlined into one single recommendation of city-sponsored down payment assistance. So we talked about creating one affordable homeownership program and connecting would-be buyers to all the possible assistance programs under one umbrella so that we don't have all these different ideas floating around and we just consolidate it into one focused program somehow. And then number 1, what's missing? How could owners be incentivized to sell affordably and who would work on this? Again, we talked about creating a city position to figure out who would do this and who would do the research to find this funding. We also talked about potentially offering sellers a listing fee rebate through the city that could be funded through the city. So maybe their 3% of their realtor fees could be reimbursed if they sold affordably, or offering them some kind of tax credit if they sold affordably. And then also, let's see, I guess that's it, yeah. Number 2, we agreed that the separate AMI recommendations would be confusing, so just take that out. We could still look at Inglewood separately, but in regard to the city-county AMI numbers, and then look at county resources for eviction and legal assistance. Arapahoe County has a pretty hefty fund for this already, so there's not really a reason that Inglewood would need to create its own if we went on a regional approach. And we would, on clarity, we would determine the guidelines for who qualifies and create a live-work preference or a school-based preference. Yeah. We did not get to 3 or 4. We went on to preserve. So for preserve number 1, what's missing? We would create a permit or tax credit to subsidize the second affordable ADU unit. Because we know building 1's expensive, so building 2, how do we make that more affordable? And then partner with maybe a prefab manufacturer and pass the savings on to buyers and renters, so we could streamline the process if we had a partnership where we have a few set units that people can build and just use those designs. And then what's missing, we would define the 100% affordable as all units are affordable to 60% of the AMI or below, or that nobody's spending more than 30% of their income on their rent. And then number 3, clarity, find the money, focus on what developers feel is easy about working with Inglewood on affordable development, because in that Charles at Lee Howe video, she talked about how easy Inglewood is to work with. We've heard Medici say it before too, so what is that and why do they like building here and what can we do better? And focus on that. And then number 3, preserve what's missing. So for senior housing, one idea we had is to focus on the development of cottage homes. I think the neighborhoods would be really receptive to if you're building 6 small homes in their neighborhood, if it's specifically of senior housing. We could partner with Malley Rec Center for support and for care for the seniors. And then also for clarity, we would create a live-work preference or a school enrollment preference. Somebody asked about if that's discriminatory against people without children, and you can create preference, but you can't exclude. And so we would focus on ties to the community, multi-generational households, but obviously open the opportunity to everybody, but just kind of rank people based on their ties to the community in general, so that nobody's being displaced. Did I cover everything?
You keep that in case you have some questions. Anything you want to add, Jake? Okay. Questions? If you could use the microphone.
I have a question about short-term rentals and ADUs. If you build an ADU on your property, are you allowed to rent that out as a short-term rental full-time because you live in the other unit?
Yes.
Can you rent your ADU short term? Yes, if you occupy the
Okay.
Other questions?
I mean, these are all obviously linked and there's a lot of overlap, even just in creating the affordable housing fund and what are we going to use those monies for? I think a lot of the stuff you talk about here in assist and preserve, that there's a good tie-in of like a greater thing we
I
can
think
put
the goal
together.
is to assist people in connecting to the funding, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
that's what our aim is. And really it comes down to this body or this person and who's helping to connect those dots and focusing on that community engagement piece.
Anything else, Hugo? No. Anyone else? Questions, comments? Please, Corey.
On, I don't remember, oh, number 2 missing, 100% affordable units. Why did you choose 60% AMI instead of 80?
We were just focusing on, by definition of affordable housing, is 60% of AMI.
I think it goes up to 80.
Does it? Okay.
Yeah. Well, I guess, I mean, yes.
I know I don't talk a ton, but one of the things we talked about is, it could be based on AMI. It could also be based on making sure you're not spending more than 30% of your income on rent or a mortgage and utilities. So like, when we talked about it, we could look at it a variety of ways, right? So affordable can have different measurements to it, but having some definition so we know what we're looking for.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing is just identifying specifics. It maybe is not 60%, but it could be that ratio focus.
I think it could also be kind of TBD, but I do wonder if a range would be a good idea, if we could possibly make some units that are 60 and some 80 and some 100 potentially throughout the city in different areas.
Other questions, comments? You're going to have another opportunity to get up, go look, do your feedback on your stickies. So just a reminder, but going once, twice. Okay, let's give the assistant preserve a hand, please. They're small but mighty. They had two.
Hello. We've simplified our 6 down to 3. One is increase the opportunity for small lot development by allowing the sales of units, ADUs, and cottage houses on the same lot. To support this, streamline the lot division and entitlement process and ensure that if a lot allows multiple units to be sold, that a percentage of the units be designated affordable. Our second is a combination of really 4 of the ones that we had. Make it as easy as possible for affordable housing developers of all types to build and deliver a variety of housing units by creating a full-time position to champion the cause and bridge the gap between public and private partnerships. Strive to increase supply of these affordable housing types: single-family, missing middle, multifamily, transitional, permanent supportive housing, and et cetera. And then our third, which I think exists already in some aspect, but adding to that the Englewood Home is Key campaign. Develop a community education campaign to convey how higher density for affordable housing can work and build upon Englewood's unique characteristics. So making sure that the Home is Key program is advocating for responsible density.
Very great. Thank you, Hugo. Questions, comments?
On number 2, I see what you did, but I feel like in combining it all, we lost maybe some of the.
You were able to combine all of yours. No,
I just feel like one of the things we've talked about is how that missing middle, how some of these product types are so necessary to be able to serve that continuum. And I just don't know if that's like direct enough to be like, no, we really, really need this.
So number 2 was all types. Number 3 was allow the construction of all types. Number 5 was now speaking to the types, which I think is what's maybe missing here. So these could be expanded out, Corey, that I think we could talk specifically on what that missing middle means. That's maybe in number 5 there. And then number 6 was transitional. So I do think this could be elaborated. And I do think that this champion for a position or cause could be tied to the fund and the body and the executive director. Or
I guess maybe where I'm struggling is, so let's say you have the fund, let's say you have the body, and let's say you have that position.
you still need to legislatively change zoning
Like
restrictions.
zoning change here.
Well, and
What's
even-
the change there? Yeah.
Yeah, to actually make these things happen, right?
You have some in assist preserve too.
Yeah, I think too, we just had that transit-oriented district passed too, so we
That's
are
true.
part of that, so that would open up an opportunity there. And then we could focus on the small lot subdivision, the cottage house zoning that we have already passed, the ADUs, so we could maximize what we already have, I think.
Other questions, comments, please, Sophie?
As far as like building affordable units in new development, did you consider or reject an inclusionary, mandatory inclusionary policy?
So I know the new code next has a percentage already for affordability. I think that this could be a place where that's so maybe where the time should be spent is on these pieces and how on, for example, multifamily could include what that recommendation would be.
Yeah, almost trying to figure out, what is the barrier to creating affordable housing for those different types?
It still seems like maybe we should make a fourth one and that like end it, like, so make it easy as possible to build all things with this champion for the cause and the bridge, and then strive to increase supply of these affordable housing types. And we could list all the types and we could then have our recommendations by type that could include potentially the sale of small lots, that could include the inclusionary zoning, or what percentage would be required on.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that makes it a bit more straightforward of like, these are the.
Too big of a topic here.
Well, and it makes it more detailed in saying, these are our specific recommendations. This is what we think could help to create more affordable housing.
I was gonna ask, do you think you should, in that, then include the percentage of set-aside recommendation in each one?
For each of these.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think that could be a good place for us as a group to work on that.
Us as a group, meaning the full group,
Well, or
this
when we come back with maybe our next round of comments,
Okay.
I think even having a guide on how to fill in and make this more detailed so that we're maybe hitting the exact goals that we want to achieve or have in as part of code potentially.
Yeah, because like you said, really the small lot, your number one is a strategy for smaller scale density. Yeah, yeah.
Let's have you keep it just for a second, just in case. Any other questions, comments? All right, you're off the hook. You can mute it. Can we give the build group a hand, please? All right, this is a checkpoint. So, you know, way before I come into this room, I have sort of these grant facilitation plans and things like that, and then sometimes it doesn't work. So you ride the horse in the direction it's going. So it sounds to me like, particularly on the build number 4, you want to get a little bit more concrete specificity on each of those housing types. And we've also acknowledged that there's some intersections here, some potential sort of, when you talk about the creating a body or creating a person, so we want to be thinking about that. So here's my question. Would you like, in your small groups, given we've had this discussion, to continue refining? Because really, this is your product. It's not ours to sort of, we'll edit it, make it look pretty. But really, this is your product. So we've got 30 minutes. You could spend some more time in your small group, or we can do refining your group. And then if you have some comments and it's concrete, you could certainly add it to the other pieces, or we just spend this time having you comment, make better the other group's recommendations. Does that make sense, what I just asked you? So one is you spend some more extended time in your small group refining yours. You certainly can comment on the others, but most of the time it's going to be refining yours. Or you really think at this point as a large group, it makes sense to do this more as a group process, in which case you're going to have sticky notes, death by sticky note. So for the first option, small group, if you could just that's my preference, raise your hand. Small group, kind of, sort of. Hugo, you want to offer a different possibility?
I mean, I think that we could spend a few minutes and refine our number 2, but I don't know if we're necessarily changing too much in ours. I know these guys probably have a little more time of just kind of coming up with what your actual recommendation is. The fund one, I think, is really good and set up well. I think that, I don't know how we all work together. I mean, we're at the end of this, we're trying to make our recommendations.
You are.
A lot of these recommendations overlap. I almost feel like we need a moderator to help us put all these pieces together to some extent.
In a session, or to pull it out and have someone who, because that's another option. I was thinking about this. So I'm not a subject matter expert. I'm not in this. Other things maybe. So it would have to come from your group, but you could identify 2 or 3 people, maybe one from each group, to do that final sort of tweaking, editing, looking for the intersections, answering some of the questions outside the session, as long as we're able to turn that around, feed it back to the whole group before the December meeting. So we could spend our time refining as a group these, and then if we had a couple of volunteers who were going to do that finer detail of editing, certainly could do that.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the sticky note exercise is kind of what we're all going to have to do as homework anyway,
Okay.
to some
So-
extent, right?
Yep. Please, Cory.
Yeah, I think if we refine as a group and discuss as a group, we can take notes, and then somebody can go back. I mean, I think that conversation right there was great because we figured out a lot right then. And I would say I'm still a little confused at the difference between assist and preserve, assist and then preserve. So maybe talking through that and trying to understand exactly, because I think ideally we distill these down into a few recommendations per one so that they're very clear. And I feel like we're getting there with this one. That one, because there's so many categories, I'm confused at where the different.
Yeah, that was just a logistical kind of, we didn't have enough people sign up, so we just combined those 2. There was not a strategic decision why we decided. It was simply, we had 2 people sign up, and so we thought to make it. The descriptions, of course, that came from the housing assessment. So really, what I hear you saying, it's really sort of maybe, so assist is distinct, although there may be some intersections. Again, I'm not the subject matter expert, but it's then when you combine it here, it's it's its own category. Is that what I hear you saying?
That's maybe where I got confused when it was combined. Yeah.
Okay. Jake, Sherry, anything you could offer that would help clarify the where you combine the assist and preserve?
I think where we combined it was how do we assist finding the funding to preserve? Because the assist was how to connect residents to these programs or builders or developers to the things that the city is doing. And then preserve was Jake's focus of this multi-generational, how do we keep families in Inglewood? and in naturally occurring affordable housing. So it is two distinct ideas, but we just combined one concept with finding the funding for the preservation.
Is that helpful, Corey?
Yes. Is that convincing?
That was a very
Somewhat helpful.
reserved, yes. Okay, so, sounds like sticky notes? Yeah? Is that what I heard? Sticky notes? And again, particularly as you're thinking about number 4, so we just, this group just split out for another recommendation, so a 4th recommendation, but it sounds like you're seeking sort of the larger group's input on what each of these types might look like. Is that correct? All right. People tired? You're tired, I can see.
I'm wondering if we should try to figure out where certain ones connect or are overlapping and then figure out where those overlaps should live, whether it's in one or the other.
I keep coming back to the same thing. Where it's
Okay.
like, we
Please.
create a fund that's governed by a task force or people, and it is getting money from these resources and is looking to promote building these things and assisting in preserving.
And if there are bullet points in assist that are like ideas that aren't listed in our first recommendation of fund, I feel like they could happily move over to that recommendation and live there.
Right.
If it's like a funding source, so.
Yeah,
if
your
there-
regional opportunities, like, all make sense there.
Same with like number 2 in assist. To me, that's maybe that should live under number 2 and fun. You know, if we're going to create this body to provide recommendations, we want that body to identify groups who should be assisted, whether it's renters, developers, homeowners, seniors. You know, to me, that's what that body should be doing, is identifying that and then saying, based on what we've identified, we recommend that these should be the priorities for that funding.
Did you get that, Tasha?
I just generalized.
Corey, could you please say that again?
So number 2 on assist is identify the groups of who should be assisted: renters, developers, homeowners, seniors, homeless, businesses, future generations, etc. There's a couple of bullet points under that as well. To me, that's kind of what we were saying that this body should do, is they should, with maybe the help of somebody actually identifying all those groups and providing them the data, but they should be recommending where the priority of where that funding should go. Let's say we have $5 million in funding. We want X amount to go towards this because it fills this need. X amount to go towards this because it fills this need.
I think that,
Go ahead.
I think that ties into number 4 too over here, and they're different property types because you're identifying who would be in each of those.
I'm sorry, maybe I just am attached to sticky notes. But it's really hard to sort of capture all of this and Tasha does know what she's doing. So can we do both and? Can I have you write those? So we're looking now at intersections, overlaps, and if you could help us clarify that so we then can turn that back to you. But the best way to do it is to have you actually write it for us. Hugo, were you going to?
The other piece that I was going to say is, and Brad answering my code next question, that it's not a recommendation there. What I don't want our group to miss in the recommendations we make is maybe like a specific thing that the code is looking for our organization or to come up with, of what certain thresholds or limits and if there's any of those missing blanks that we as a group should be talking about and including in more specific making more specific, like, I think that's important. Some of these are very general and are great ideas, but if there's certain things that we're supposed to hit on to meet the strategic vision, but also meet the needs of what they're looking for us to do from a Code Next or a city standpoint, I think we should make sure we do that.
Is that like the inclusionary zoning example you referenced earlier?
Brad,
Or even more specifically saying, we should eliminate single-family zoning. I don't want to do that, but, you know, is that what you're saying? Like, what do we specifically think will create more affordable housing?
Brad, do you have thoughts on how we clarify Code Next, the specificity, or have thoughts of how Hugo?
What Code Next did, and now the new Land Use Development Code or Unified Development Code does, is it establishes additional housing types that can be built in more areas of the community than before. One of the things that Code Next didn't do was reserve the issue of how we would define affordable housing requirements based on the work of this group. So that's kind of a follow-on that Code Next can do in terms of any type of amendments that may be needed based on your recommendations, the council formulating those as in terms of policies for the city. That could still come. It was kind of intended as a reserve. We changed the housing types, we changed some of the density requirements, but things like inclusionary zoning or anything specific like that, that was specifically withheld pending the work of this group.
So just to clarify, you created more housing types. You did change some zoning, but not a lot of zoning in terms of upzoning.
We didn't change a single zoning district at
Okay.
all. What we did is we changed the density requirements of certain of the zoning districts. So we didn't change zoning. We just
When you say
changed the,
density requirements, what do you mean exactly?
like the cottage zoning on the corners that can happen now, that wasn't there
Gotcha.
before. So those types of uses are now included in the development code. We didn't rezone any areas.
So
All the
then what you're
zones stayed
saying
the
is,
same.
when you refer to the affordable housing piece of that, you're saying you were kind of waiting for this to recommend, hey, if you're rezoning from single to a duplex, you should have this much affordable housing, or if you're upzoning from this to that, you should include this much affordable housing, or what the affordable housing strategy is when something is rezoned.
I think, again, I think the strategy around what we were trying to do with the Code Next in terms of the timing was to establish new housing development parameters. But when it came to the affordable standards, that this group would wrestle with those issues. This group would come up with some recommendations that the council could then in turn translate into requirements for our development standards. There's a whole list of things on these papers that won't be in our development code. They'll be elsewhere. They'll be in a separate housing policy. Mm-hmm. But the things that could be specifically imported into the development code, that's in front of us in terms of whatever you want to recommend around that, and city council will deliberate on it. And then if there are changes that are necessary, then the council will direct those changes.
And I think you're right, Hugo. I think that's not necessarily in these recommendations right now.
I was gonna say maybe we should focus more on then, like, what are the AMI standards? Who specifically are we trying to help? And then what are the set aside percentages and within all of these recommendations?
Which would be in alignment with your strategic vision, right?
In regards to that, I think it might help to keep it a little bit broad because it depends so much on how much money there is. So I think that like our recommendations for assist and preserve and build are kind of assuming we have the money, like that we have what do we think we should do with no thought to how much money there is. And then on the fund side, you know, there's this oversight body where we see what do we actually have and what are our needs at that time. and how do we distribute it? But I think, as you said, it's important to communicate our strategic vision and what the goal is. And I think we could provide more definition to like who our priorities are, but also allow for that to change over time and under different circumstances, depending on what what money we have to work with.
And I think that's the point of the body too, right? Is to keep this evolving and keep the conversation going so it just doesn't stop with us.
Exactly.
But I think what Brad is saying is, regardless of funding, let's say it just doesn't get passed, we can't get any funding figured out. Are there some affordability restrictions that we want to get into code so that if somebody is developing any one of those types of housing, they have to include affordable housing in that? And I think we could try to, I worry a little bit tying like AMIs because that it is fairly fluid, but you could somewhat tie it to the product type over there in that number 4.
On your guys' funding sources, linkage fees, inclusionary zoning fees in lieu, I mean, you hit on, I think, some of these areas that Code Next or council is maybe looking for our recommendations on, but it's still very high level and not getting into the weeds on. So it's almost like you could have more detail on your funding sources, the same way we could have more detail on the build types.
Yeah, for sure.
Other thoughts, please, Sherry?
I was going to say maybe we could add more detail on who we're focusing on, elaborating on that, I guess. Who are these groups that we're targeting and what are the preferences?
Distinct from what you have here?
Just who are those people and how, yeah, I don't know. How do we connect with those people in Inglewood? So how do we get this to, where do we find those people and identify, are they in the schools, or are they in the hospital district, or, you know?
So a next level sort of detail or down of that broader characterization?
Right, or like which programs could we partner with on a regional level, like specifically? What are the funds available to connect people to that are outside of Inglewood that are already available?
So here's what I'm hearing. You'll tell me, it's sort of this tension point of, do we have more concreteness in our recommendations, or do we keep them broader so that we have more, that would be more directive and protect certain aspects, and then a broader, which allows for flexibility? Am I accurate there that I'm hearing that? Please,
I think
Tasha.
you can't have flexibility in the case of number 4 under build, because you have to get very specific there. And so I think what you all are, you're facing that challenge, right, where you're going to have to get into that specificity. I don't think you can be broad.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think over there, we're saying maybe there's more broadness, but we're creating a body to help direct that broadness. Over here, I think, yeah, we have to get more specific. And Brad, can you help me understand the opportunities in which we can then require somebody to do affordable housing? Is it either, like we do a blanket, kind of how Denver does it, if they implemented something that says if you develop 8 or more units, you have to do affordable housing. There's that. Or is there also then the opportunity that if somebody is changing zoning or doing something that then you can add this requirement? Are there any other opportunities where we can say you have to do, because right now if somebody has use by right, you would have to create something to require them to do affordable housing, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. And if somebody wanted to change that use by right, could you then require them to do affordable housing?
I think certainly we could. I think one of the things that we're trying to do in terms of the outcome of this work and then what the city council does is the possibility of creating kind of a housing policy for the community, where in the policy, the broad strokes are defined, some of the financial things may be defined, but I would just encourage you not to just think about this as all just has to live in our development code and it's kind of a land use orientation. I think it's broader than that. And so the choices that could be made about what to include in our development regulations, I think our Planning and Zoning Commission and our City Council will deliberate in far further depth than you all are being charged to do, because they'll have the public input on that, and then they'll make those decisions based on those levels of input. So I think you all including what you think is most beneficial to the community across the board that could be housed, no pun intended, in a housing policy, and then some of those things could be incorporated into our land use development regulations. That's kind of where I think some of this stuff will ultimately be resolved. It'll be, different pots of places that the city will choose to implement housing policies and that type of thing.
So would it be helpful then if we aligned kind of what you're saying, who we think needs affordable housing with some of the housing types that you created in Code Next? So it's clear to you that if homeownership is a priority, well, homeownership, is really focused on these certain housing types within the code.
Yeah, the last thing I'm going to do is direct you in a certain way. If you don't give specific parameters around where these housing types should be and who should occupy them, that's the job that would then shift to our Planning and Zoning Commission and ultimately the City Council to engage in those debates. If you want to identify them as issues and as things that they should prioritize and consider, that I think is a healthy outcome for some of your discussion.
I just think it's important to note that the staff is not going to tell you what to do, right?
Yeah.
That's why you're here. They're looking for your recommendation as a representative of the community, and so they can't tell you where to fill in the holes for Code Next. They're looking to you based on all these months of what you believe is the best recommendation for the city of Inglewood. And look what you've done so far. I think it's just some refining, some Post-its, some more feedback. But I don't think we can keep asking Brad, well, Brad, just tell us. The staff that's not why you're here.
I think I was just trying to understand how detailed we get into our recommendations within, especially in relation to the development code.
And I would say get as detailed as you think would help position the city to do what's right by the community in delivering affordable housing in the spectrum.
So an example, I guess, would be, we know that maybe missing middle housing is a bit more, I can't say it's cheaper to develop, but it fills a need in some way. Or homeownership is maybe a need. Missing middle housing is great homeownership type housing. So we want to prioritize that type of housing to further, creating more homeownership. Now that needs to be paired with funding and some other things to actually get it to the point where it's affordable. But that is the product type that will create more homeownership opportunities. Put that in there.
Okay. So, there's more work to be done.
I feel like we have a lot more work to do. Just this last iteration makes me feel like there's a lot more than maybe just refining what's on the board, but kind of filling in some more blanks and being a little bit more detailed.
So, we have one more meeting on December 5th. And that's not going to get done at that meeting. So it's going to have to happen outside the meeting. Or, this is where the staff can direct me, we somehow extend the process. Because what we don't want to do is have the tail wag the dog, right? You want to be able to offer up the most powerful and congruent set of recommendations. That's not why you signed up. You signed up through December. So if we can figure out a way to do this outside, so that we come into December with a final set of recommendations. There may be some, tweaking of very minor, some small edits, things like that. But essentially what we're seeking in December is, ideally what we're seeking is consensus.
I just feel like there's too much overlap, and that in finalizing this, it probably makes sense to kind of look at it all together, and that people can then layer in their comments on kind of our all-encompassing final report.
Okay. So what that would look like is you'd have to, and Nancy is not here because there's some legal compliance things that we have to follow as a public meeting, right? But so the most logical way that would work is to actually have December be a working meeting. With maybe something in between, but have December be a working meeting with all of you together. That's, I don't know what that means in terms of the final vote, because we actually do have to have you vote on a final set of recommendations. I don't know that I can get that all done in a 2-hour session, where you work together, refine, get a final. We try to seek consensus. So, please, I'm open.
In terms of process, I think there's a couple of different ways to do it. One certainly is, I know in preparation for this, you worked in small groups that didn't meet the open meeting law threshold because you brought your work back here. So that's one option to work, as individuals or in tiny groups. Another option could be, and I know it gets hard around the holidays for a lot of reasons, but if you wanted to, you could certainly add another meeting if you wanted to do that. Another option would be, to kind of, we could ask, if you wanted to ask council for an additional month. I know we had hoped to have this work done around now, but we also know how challenging this work is and how hard you've all worked on it. And so that's also something you could do. So there's just a few options. So I guess option one would be to do some small group work and then bring it back. Option two would be to add an additional meeting that we would work with your schedules to schedule. Option three would be to ask for an extension. I guess option four would be to work within the confines of the schedule we have with one more meeting in December.
Thank you, Tim. So you got the options? So we'll go Sherry, Hugo, and then at some point we're just going to have to choose, right?
So my thought was that maybe next time we meet and we refine these, and then potentially could you send them out to everybody for a vote and we just submit our vote that way?
We're usually a little hesitant to do voting outside of posted meetings, but we could send, as long as there isn't any communication happening of the whole group, we could package them and send them out, and then you could do a vote at the beginning of the meeting in December.
Please.
I kind of like the combination of the 1, 2, the small group, or another meeting. Like, could we set a time? And if only 3 or 4 people make it, then it's a small group. But if 8 or 10 people could make it, it would be a larger group, but it would be a meeting. And we could try to tie everything together, the overlapping intersections of what our final report would look like. Spend a little time then, whether we're all together doing this or individually maybe doing it, reviewing kind of the code next meeting of specific refinements that could be added then to that plan. And then I think if we could have something that was worked on like that over the next 30 days, that when we come in December, we actually can have this thing that's more put together with maybe more specific feedback that we could get to a place at the end of the meeting where we could vote on it. But if we don't, we could maybe then ask for another month. I don't know.
I'm just a little confused about combining 1 and 2. So are you suggesting that you stay in your small group, you schedule meetings, or are you suggesting we schedule a meeting and then whoever shows up, shows up? Is that?
And we all work to
Okay.
kind of put it all together and create a plan.
1 meeting. In that case, you do have to, there has to be a public notice, right? Okay. All right. Please.
Just to be clear, we did public notices for when you first got in your groups and you did your in-person meetings. Those were all publicly noticed. So that's
It's always.
just calling another meeting between now and December 5th. That's not a problem.
Okay, great. All right. Let me just ask, can we do a doodle poll? Or do we have to schedule something and then people just, is it possible to poll?
Yes, we can
Yes.
poll the group.
And then we can announce when that date is?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah, we can get a common date between now and December 5th through a poll and then establish that as the meeting. As Hugo said, the folks who are available can come and participate in that.
okay. So let me say back what I've heard. So what I've heard is we're going to first poll you are to see what's the most common time for you to meet. You're going to come back together. You're going to work in large group, and you're going to look at this and get these to a more final kind of product. You'll give that back to us. We'll put it in some sort of format, feed it back to you for you to look at prior to December 5th. December 5th, you'll put some final kind of maybe edits to it, and then hopefully we'll have time and there's enough consensus or majority to be able to approve the final recommendations. Is that what I heard, please, Hugo?
Yeah, I think that the in-between piece could be if we come together for an hour or two and work on how like our final report could kind of look from an outline and piece together, that after that, we could have our at-home sticky notes, kind of like what we did on the making it better. And that on that task, not only could people just provide whatever recommendations, but we could hone in and focus on maybe some of the specifics that would be missing per Code Next or specific AMI targets or things like that, that we could refine it with. That when we're all together as a big group, I think it's more en masse, kind of like creating the outline, and that we could then spend another week or two adding things to that.
Here's my concern about that, is that individually, when you start adding things, and it potentially creates challenge in getting to consensus, because you've done that on an individual basis. But let me think about how to reframe it so it's not what's missing, what's 10% better.
What if we do what you just said, but in reverse? Like, basically, we all, let's say we set a meeting 2 or 3 weeks from now. We all take that time to think about what are the exact policies or the things that I really think that I stand behind for this, and this, for the different strategies. And then we put it all on the table, all the specifics we come up with at the next, supplemental meeting we have. And then hopefully come up with something in that time that we can vote on in December.
Does that work? Okay. All right, that's what we're going to do. And here's what what we can do. So this is going to come in as a report, right? So there'll be an executive summary, sort of here's been our process, here's who sat on the task force. We can sort of very high level outline that. Once we get to the final set of recommendations, that will go into that final report, and then the comms team, who are much more talented than I, they'll put it into this really nice looking sort of product. If you go to the Inglewood website, you can look at it was Police Reform Task Force. Yeah, that's a good example of what, it may not be as sort of thick, but that's a good example. So we'll reference some pieces in the housing assessment. It's kind of like how it is that we got here. Please, Tim.
Yeah, and I would also just add to that, Glenn, I believe it's on that website, but there's a white paper that actually, if you have half an hour to read, that basically describes from beginning to end the whole police reform task force process. So that's also kind of a good document to review just on what a process like this looks like and how it starts and where it ends and things like that.
I should probably have read that. All right, so we're 5 minutes over. I think we have a plan, right? So you expect to hear from us, first of all, what that question or questions are to get the individual input. We'll then turn it around, feed it back to you before you have your large group meeting, and we'll send out a poll to see what works best for folks. Those who aren't able to make it, we're going to ask you, it's kind of, we're at the point now, you know, we were talking about alignment here many sessions ago. At this point, you may not agree with everything, but we're going to ask you to align. So it might be a question like, is there anything in here that you cannot live with, right? To force that kind of alignment. If we can't get to alignment, we're going to do a vote. All right. Final reflections, questions? All right. Very great. Thank you all for staying 5 minutes past.